So today we're going to talk about the principle of cause and effect with the intention of it changing your life, right? We don't want to just have a cerebral discussion about it. We want to go, how is this going to apply to the life that I have so that I can get closer to the life that I desire? So I want to start off by talking about these, what's often spoken of as these planes of existence. And this is, of course, something that sounds a little like esoteric or conceptual. But here's one way to think about it. When it comes to banking, and these days, most of us have our banking in some sort of online function. So we could all open up our bank accounts on our phones, and ultimately there shows a number that says, this is how much money is yours. Now, is it a mystery how each one got to that level of how much money you have? I mean, one person has 500, the other person has 0, another person has 20,000, another person has 5 million. How does each person get to that? Because if we all hold up our phones, we show, well, this is my number. Well, there's a ton of activity that happens that leads to that particular number. So that's one way to think about these two planes of existence. The plane of effect, which is what is evident, the evidence that is really unchangeable in this moment. And then there's the plane of cause, which is all the activity preceding the effect, which led to the existing effect. So typically, if I want to show, oh, this is my bank balance and I have, $25,000, what everybody in the room has not seen is my work history and the activities when I've been to the bank and when I paid these bills and all this kind of stuff that has led to this end result. And I think this is a good analogy to understand how the activity that occurs in your mind, the way that you respond to your emotions, the actions that you take as a result of your thoughts, your understanding of how to move within the existing reality that is the reality created by the mass consciousness of humanity, leads to a series of effects which now are evident in the life that you have. So you could look at your life and say, my life exists, the effects of my life today in this moment are a result of all these causes which I have put into effect. And these causes are put into effect primarily through my understanding that occurs internally in the mind. So one of the principles that we're not going to address so much today is the principle of mentalism. And if you know anything about these 7 Hermetic principles, you can see videos on YouTube about people who speak about the 7 Hermetic principles. And one of them is mentalism, that everything is a function of mind. And then one of these weeks we're going to talk about the principle of correspondence. And the principle of correspondence, in simple terms, is as above, so below. So if you want to understand how the Creator functions over the entire universe, you examine how your consciousness functions, because we have the presence of the Creator within, and our body and our lives represent a universe to us. So that's considered the microcosm, which operates in the same principles as the macrocosm. So in order to understand God, you can seek to understand how you function consciously. And it's really exciting because you begin to see all these parallels. And that's sort of where enlightenment begins to happen, because sometimes you look to nature and go, oh, I see how nature functions. That must function within me as well. And I see the way that I create by making a decision, streamlining my desire, aligning my thought, word, and action with a particular end result. I begin to implement, and as a result, matter changes. The matter of my life begins to conform to the thought patterns which I sustain. So then we go, oh, I wonder if God functions in the same way. Well, because we understand correspondence, we say, it must be. And so then I look for evidence of that. Well, it's a little hard to understand exactly God's thoughts, except when you realize that you have that presence within you. So that it becomes very exciting to go like, oh, I want to know that experience. I want to open the channels to be able to perceive the thoughts of God within me. And that is very possible. That, to me, is exactly what Jesus is teaching. The dominion of heaven, the pearl of great price, this is a real experience that we can have. So one of the reasons that we study the Gospels is because we are looking at the example of somebody who did it in order that we might follow that. Okay, so now we're faced with the very challenging task of inventorying our mental library, our mental experiences, our mental concepts, our belief systems. And no matter who we are, no matter how evolved we think we are, we're going to find discrepancies between ourselves and the capital T truth. I mean, I just believe if we're on Earth, we've got stuff to learn still. No matter how evolved you think you are, I think that there's stuff that we're going to find inconsistencies. So that makes it exciting. It's like, oh, I would like to. There's a great passage, we talked about it one day in Bible class, which was John the Baptist goes, make straight the ways of the Lord. And it's one of those sentences that you have to go, I like it, but I'm not sure why. What does it mean to make straight the ways of the Lord? Well, you could think of it in terms of all activity within, all the mental activity is a straight line to the love, to the truth, to God. Where does it become jagged? Well, if somebody does something to me and it creates an emotional reaction where I become angry, our process as mystics is to diffuse the anger through consciousness and then make a decision in terms of our action, which is hopefully based in justice as well as love, forgiveness, grace, whatever, the positive virtues that Jesus taught. In our culture, we are often taught to go, well, somebody wronged me. That anger leads to a fuel of injustice, and now I am entitled to take a negative action against that person. So that is not a straight way to the Lord. That is a crooked line, we would say. Now, our belief system is supported by the idea that, well, I am righting a wrong. I did not experience that as a teaching as part of Jesus' doctrine. He did not say that you are to go out and right the wrongs that the fellow human beings create against you or impose against you. But, you know, we have a culture that doesn't see this other level that exists, this level of forgiveness. I mean, we see it in easy situations, but we don't see it in difficult situations. It makes too much sense to us because our culture has become very, very, I would say, almost addicted to this energy of taking revenge, of righting the wrongs ourselves. I mean, the TV, the movies, the media, the discussions are very much about that. So that is a place where if you start to wonder why certain effects in your life are not what you actually truly desire, you have to back it out to the degree to which, you know, you're still living in accord with a belief system that feels that that's okay, to take revenge in some way, to act against a human being. Now, there's a lot of subtlety to that. And people will often present situations to me that are not really pertinent to their lives. Like, well, what happens if somebody comes to me and they got a knife and they're threatening my kids and all that stuff? I don't know. I mean, if that were to happen, then I'm sure that you would respond to the best of your ability. This was sort of the nature of the Pharisaical approach to Jesus, was they would present scenarios that were so far from reality because they were trying to discredit the doctrine that he brought. And so he often just went, you really don't know what you're talking about. In our terms, in our modern language, I would say that he was going, your energy is funky. You're not really coming to me, respecting me as a teacher. You're looking to trap me. And then he would say, why are you doing that? And they would be like, well, we don't know what you're talking about. I was like, oh, now you're lying too. Okay, well, so I'm not going to answer any of your questions. So we don't want to approach in a lot of these hypothetical means because generally the attitude of that is not really open and receptive. We have to look at our individual lives and go, I want the effects of my life to be congruent with love, God, and whatever that means, if that's what you actually want. And there are various levels in terms of to what degree you want to do that. Some people feel this incredible, compelling need to serve God and humanity. Others just kind of want to live a peaceful life. So, and there's many degrees in between those two, or the parable of the sower. Some will yield 30 times, some will yield 60, some will yield 100. And there wasn't a judgment that 100 is better than 30, but some people feel the draw to go all the way to 100, I guess. So if that's the case, there's a greater responsibility to understand these principles, because the higher numbers require a greater understanding so that you can reach that place. So I want to talk about, remember I said that there's some examples that I think are a little funky. So I'll speak about my own experience. There's something that I've always been somewhat enamored with, and that is just maintaining a muscular physique. I don't want to be a big bodybuilder guy, but I just like the idea of staying lean and muscular. And I've had friends over the years, and we've tried to figure it out. You know, how do you actually get to these levels of body fat? Well, back before there was YouTube, you sort of had just a limited amount of information. It seemed like the real secrets to how to get there were kind of hard to come by. And there were all sorts of business opportunities that promised that you could get to this level of, you know, your abs are shredded and all this kind of stuff. Well, when you actually decide, I want that effect, so I'm going to back it out and I'm going to figure out what are the actual causes that get there. First of all, the doors begin to open, but you have to walk through them, and some of them are, you know, relatively squeaky and hard to open, meaning they require effort. And there's a certain amount of sacrifice that you have to make. Then when you begin to watch these commercials, the infomercials that show, you know, this guy that's got freaking like 3% body fat and he's doing this thing, or he's got the electrodes that are just sending electric shocks and going like, you don't even have to do anything. You just sit around, eat snacks, and you'll get ripped. Well, okay, first of all, the guy doing that commercial knows that that's not true. So he's out of accord with the truth because that's not how it works. The people selling it know it doesn't work, but they figure, you know, if we can unload 500,000 units before people figure it out, hey, we've made money. So they're operating from an understanding that is not caring about the human being, it's caring about the money. And so they're presenting a dishonest situation. And then the individuals buy these things and they are unhappy because they don't actually attain the results that they want. So how do you actually get to that place? Well, it has a lot more to understand how the body processes fat in order to use fat as fuel as opposed to using other sources for fuel. And even understanding that still means you have to implement it. So when you want to live in accord with the principles of cause and effect, there's a tremendous responsibility. And I always teach that responsibility is freedom. To be able to respond to the truth, which exists as a source within, the kingdom of heaven is the source of truth. If you want to be able to respond to that, you have to prepare yourself for that experience. You have to be shown the way. And I teach that Jesus shows the way. When he says he is the way, we teach that the Christ, the presence of that truth, is the way. Now, yesterday we had in the sermon yesterday we read from John 10, at which point Jesus begins the passage by saying, if somebody does not enter through the gate, they are a thief and a bandit. Now, it is possible to enter without going through the gate. If you want to take certain types of drugs, they can open your doors to perception. Hallucinogenic drugs can open your perception to begin to experience things that are spiritually true. Why would that make you a thief and a bandit? Because you have not prepared for the experience. And also, what are the effects of following that cause? Well, okay, the immediate effect is a change in your perception, and that's exciting. The long-term effect is an erosion of the physical body. Not to mention the fact that you may have experiences in the spiritual world, but you have not developed to a place where you can actually be functional in that. And I know that from my own experience because I tried to do all these things to try to access the spiritual realm because I was very hungry for that. And there were certain things that I saw, but I very quickly realized I'm operating in a sphere which I'm not really adequately prepared for. And when I did finally meet teachers of Christian mysticism, they said, yeah, that's not the way. The way is love. Like, why don't you learn the causes which lead to the arrival at the gate and then humbly stand there until the gate is opened for you. And then you can walk through with a free conscience, as opposed to trying to figure a way to maneuver your way in. And that made sense to me. So I put away these kind of other pursuits, out-of-body experiences and sort of extreme fasting in order to create a state of deprivation in order to induce spiritual experiences. Well, first of all, this law of cause and effect is considered immutable. It is a natural law and there's no escaping it. We do have free will, which means we can't not participate in it, because no matter what we do, think, how we respond to our emotional reactions, We are setting causes in motion. So you can't escape this law. However, to whatever degree you want to be conscious of it and you want to be responsible to it is up to you. For a long time, I was reading these books. This is probably in my late 20s and 30s, Think and Grow Rich and Millionaire Mind and Power of Positive Thinking, because wealth was attractive to me because I was living in poverty, basically. What wasn't attractive to me at the time was working. So it shouldn't be a big surprise that I was not amassing a huge fortune when I was not really willing to work that much. But I had this belief, because I was very much into this metaphysical approach, that I could be exempt from the means to reach these effects, that simply by the use of mind, I could draw the wealth to me. And there were certain books that sort of encouraged that. I mean, of course, those are the books that sell really well because it makes it seem like, wow, this is going to be really easy, right? So in addition to understanding the principle, we have to follow it up with the implementation. So if you, for example, in my case, okay, I wanted to manifest wealth. So I spent a lot of time visualizing myself, creating the thought patterns that supported an image of myself as a wealthy individual. And wealthy at that time was probably just having 25 grand, because I barely had enough money to pay the rent every month. So having 25,000 would have seemed like, oh my God, I can take a vacation and take a year off, right? So, but that would have been nice to be able to manifest that amount of money at that time. In order for the causes to yield the effects, we have to, first of all, align our belief system with that. Now, this is where the mystical path probably loses a lot of people, because we end up having to scrutinize ourselves at the deepest level that we can possibly see. And this is where meditation is really essential. That if there is an effect that we have not manifest, we start off by going, how am I setting a cause in motion that conflicts with the effect that I want? Where is it that within myself, because all I can change is what I'm responsible for. If I start to look outward and go like, well, because I'm a woman, because I'm black, because I'm Muslim, because I'm not that bright, these things are eluding me. I'm being victimized by a society that does not treat me fairly. Well, there is some truth. Of course, there's bias based on all those factors. But now you go back and you go like, why is it that I am black, a woman, too short, too heavy, not smart enough? I don't know. I have to begin to trace further and further back to take responsibility for my existence at any level that I can perceive of. And people go like, well, that's ridiculous. I was born into this, I was born into that. If you understand reincarnation, then you know that cause and effect does not start at this life. So there are causes that may have been set in motion in a prior life. Take, for example, this idea of people who get involved in criminal activity. And they've surrounded themselves and they've been very, very crafty in setting up the effects they want, which is to be buffered from the actual prosecution, because they have all the hitmen and all the people doing the dirty work for them, and so they keep themselves clean. But their conscience is filthy because it's all based in corruption and taking advantage of it. And they pass away, they die, and they have not yet been apprehended by the law and have had to pay for their crimes against humanity. Would it not make sense that in a future incarnation, those causes are going to lead to certain negative effects? Which helps us understand why, well, how is it possible that this 3-year-old has this horrible condition? Or why is it this 10-year-old is sex trafficked for blah, blah, blah? How come this person who's a 17-year-old is now going to jail for something they didn't do? Well, when you understand that these can be residual effects of causes set in motion, that the soul is ageless in that sense. And of course, people fly into a rage about, oh my God. But when you study the whole system, it is perfect in a sense. It's just that, are we ready as human beings to take that level of responsibility? Because if we are, then our whole legal system really changes dramatically. I was thinking about this the other day as I was driving around and seeing so many legal law offices. I mean, it's a huge business, right? And not to say I'm against the legal profession. But I think about people's response to when they're faced with legal difficulties. I mean, my older brother is a criminal attorney. And so I've had a chance to have discussions with him about certain things. And, I mean, I would think, just as a sort of keeping the way straight to the Lord, if I did something wrong, then I would call an attorney and said, this is what I did wrong, what are the consequences, and how do we proceed? Because I'm responsible for what I did, so let's just take care of it and get on with it. At which point, hopefully, my attorney would say, call the attorney for whoever's prosecuting and go, okay, this is what happened, so what do we do next? The whole thing's wrapped up in an hour. Well, in our culture, we have somebody who says, well, I don't want to be responsible for what I did. So I'm going to create all sorts of lies to cover up what I did. I don't want to take responsibility for what I did because, well, what if they send me to prison? And prison's a horrible place. It's like, well, why did you do the thing you did in the first place? Like, at what point did you disconnect from your conscience and go, there will be an effect from this cause which I'm setting into motion? So this level of responsibility is difficult. Now, I did some prison ministry for 4 years, so I've sat in the room many times with people who are incarcerated for serious crimes. And almost universally, we have education, lacking education, which creates sort of a gap in terms of people's understanding of what they're going to do, in addition to a very undeveloped emotional side, an inability to process the negative emotions effectively. So people get angry, and they decide that they can then take actions that violate other human beings, simply because they feel unfairly treated. So again, that's, as we talked about earlier, that's a way in which it is an unstraight path to the Lord. It's like, I'm going to do justice because I'm in an emotional state, as opposed to realizing, if I'm in an emotional state, I am likely to set in motion causes that are going to lead to negative effects. And in simple cases, we see that it's like, I get a text that's kind of a little bit jarring, then I want to quickly fire a text back, or I want to withdraw completely as a way to demonstrate, my disagreement with what you've done. I'm going to now punish you in some way. So I set an effect in motion. Now, we're going to talk about the law of karma in one of these weeks. The problem with doing that is that you don't neutralize the negative act done to you. You initiate a new cycle of karma because you're responsible for the actions that you take. So let's say you run a business and somebody doesn't pay you the amount of money that they owe you. There's many choices in terms of what to do. It may be appropriate to take legal action, or it may be appropriate to go, have I in the past set in motion causes which have been dishonest, or I've chosen not to pay certain bills? Is this partly a retribution in order to teach me, oh, the effect of not receiving money that is owed to you is quite painful? I get the message, God. I'm sorry for what I did 2 years ago when I decided it wasn't important to pay this person back. The pain that I'm receiving here as a result of somebody not paying me, that shows me more viscerally why this is not good. I get it. I'm going to forgive that person. I'm going to apologize to that person. Tremendous growth. And no legal entanglements, no lingering waste of time. Getting to that place where I can accept all that, that is a level of consciousness. That is a consciousness of responsibility. If somebody came to me and said, like, well, I've got all these people who are not paying me, my first inclination is not like, well, have you found a good lawyer? My first inclination is to go, have you searched within yourself to what degree these effects are as a result of causes that you may have initiated? I mean, that language is a little intense. I might soften it up a bit and go like, are you paying all your bills on time? Have you done so? Now, almost immediately people, of course, I'm impeccable with my finances. Well, let's open up the books. Let's take a look. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that's there that's not necessarily on the books. I mean, you have to understand that, or you don't have to understand, it's a little intense language, but try to understand that this principle of cause and effect operates on energetic terms. It doesn't operate on, well, if this guy rips me off in business, that would mean I had to rip somebody else off in business, which I've never done. No, it's not that way. It's if I rip somebody off energetically, I will be ripped off energetically, because if I don't learn it through consciousness, I will have to learn it through experience. This is the beautiful thing. I think if you really meditate on the mission of Jesus, that God was creating a way for us to circumvent our karma by providing a way for the karma or the sins to be forgiven. because the accumulation of the karma that humanity carries is tremendous. I mean, we know every day people are being killed and imprisoned for their political beliefs, and tortured and murdered, and children are being sex trafficked, and people are slaves for labor, for sex, for whatever. Like, I mean, that is happening in this very moment. Millions of people are suffering at this moment. And I think of we. I don't go, they're doing it. I go, we are doing it to each other. And we're doing it because there's an effect that we want, and we're disconnecting from the effect that we're causing this other person. We disconnect from the idea that that person is suffering as a result of our injustice. And in fact, we're high-fiving each other, going like, check it out, I've got all these people that I'm just totally using and manipulating and torturing and killing. And there's a certain glee that is achieved in our culture for that, which is, I mean, to me it's sickening. What can you do about it? Well, the first thing that we strive to do is change our internal system so that we can actually become a force for change. If you want to go out there and diffuse these systems, if I want to go out there and I'm going to take on sex trafficking of children, I'm going to make that my cause. Why would that change? Because I'm going to go out there and now I'm going to have to violently expose people, and the cops are going to come in and arrest these people. Okay, so I may be able to save a handful of kids, but I'm one person. How does the whole system change? How do we get to a place where humanity does not feel it is an option to do that? The thinking of humanity has to change. The idea that my sexual orgasm trumps the feelings of a 9-year-old girl or a 10-year-old boy, that's relatively basic to most of us, at least in this room. But unfortunately, to millions of people, that doesn't register at all. That the effect of their own sexual gratitude is more important than the traumatic effect upon another human being of being abused in that way. So if we want to really affect the globe, we want to create an effect on the globe that is dramatic, then we have to get all this stuff aligned within ourselves. And then, to whatever degree you want to go out and be an advocate for this change, this transformation of consciousness, you may be able to affect, who knows, 10 people, 100 people, 1,000 people. I mean, if you get to a place where you're talking about being on Oprah, yeah, if you get to be on a TV show where millions of people see you, you can affect way more people. Of course, the challenge is when you really start to talk about stuff at this level and you put responsibility on people to go examine within yourself to what degree the effects of your life begin with the causes in your mental thinking. When your conscience is developed in accord with the Christ force, the Christ consciousness, you become very sensitive to when you are about to cross a line. And this is not about good and evil, because we've had these discussions about, like, well, if I'm being selfish, does that mean I'm being evil? I mean, it's about a conscience that tells you when you are slipping out of the parameters of what I consider, behaviors of love, in accord with the Creator. In order to get to that place, we have to have a process. What are some of the things that diffuse it? Well, if you spend a lot of time playing violent video games, for example, your conscience becomes shut down, because in order for you to find the joy in, killing the people, the aliens, whatever, the destruction, to a certain degree, your conscience has to become dormant. Or certain situations, certain entertainment, certain ways of living. I mean, I was pretty adamant when I was in Chicago. Chicago is a place that attracts a lot of people who want to do trading I don't mean trading pelts. I mean, trading, high frequency trading of securities and stocks and bonds. I mean, there's a whole industry now that's set up to skim money off the retirement funds of the American people. It's like we can figure out through technology how to put a trade in and 3 seconds later take the trade out and take $1 million out of the system. And I consider that a violation, to be honest with you, even though it's legal. The security exchanges have figured out a way to monitor it and regulate it. But what are we doing? These companies are not providing any kind of service. They're just figuring out a way through technology. This is my opinion, so I don't want to impose any pressure on anybody. But there was a few people who I worked with who I said, it would be better for you not to work in that industry, because it's not good for your soul. It's not good for your conscience.
What I'm hearing, what keeps coming back to me, is that we need to be in tune and aware of our motives.
Yeah.
And that our motives need to be in line with love and Christ.
Yeah.
So we need a path to get there.
Yeah. Yeah, it's humility that starts off by saying,
Yeah.
I probably am in some capacities, and other capacities I'm probably not. And some I'm not. There's stuff I know I'm not. Okay, I'm going to try to change those. There's areas that I don't know if I am or not, and I need somebody with spiritual sight to help me. And then there's areas where I'm pretty sure I am. And so I'm going to keep doing those. And then once we realize what the motives are, how do I implement? You know, the implementation can be frustrating. You know, going back to what I was saying, if you want to get down to a place where you've got the kind of physique that you see in the magazines, yeah, you're going to have to exert an effort. That is kind of painful. You can't eat all the foods you want. You have to set up your exercise. You have to eat at certain times. I mean, I know because I've lived it. And I reached a point where I was like, okay, that's as much as I want to do. I don't want to take it beyond this point because it becomes a little bit too vain. You know, I mean, like when I was at my sort of leanest, I wasn't the happiest. You know, it was sort of cold a lot of times. I was hungry all the time, as it turned out. And I wasn't that energetic. And I remember reading this one guy who did, like, he was a model for, you know, this guy was super ripped, and he would go on these modeling shoots, and he was just like, you know, I knew before the day of the shoot, like the 3 days prior, I had to reduce my water intake, I had to eat, you know, only proteins and all this kind of stuff that he had to do. And then he was very weak. And so it becomes a trade-off, you know. How much do you want that end result? Well, that end result of being, you know, 6% body fat, I wouldn't say that's in accord with Christ's highest mission. You know, clearly. That was just something that was interesting to me. And I know where it started. It was like when I was at camp and the camp counselors had the ripped abs, I was like, man, those guys look cool. So my whole life's been conditioned by that experience. But I keep it in check, you know, because it's one of those things that I find interesting. But let's say that you want to now reach this place. You want to acquire the pearl of great price. You want to enter into the dominion of heaven. The Christ is the gate. How do I get to the place where I am from the consciousness perspective? It's not you're going to be standing at a physical gate. I mean, you could have a dream where you're standing at a physical gate, and that's the metaphysical soul's symbolism showing you that you're getting close. And you may have a message in that shows you why, or that the gate is about to open, so that it's your soul saying you're on the right track. Keep going. This is good. But there is a process by which we align our lives with the teachings in order that this experience of standing before the gate and being allowed to enter, to come into that presence, is granted. Now, some people can have spontaneous experiences. I'm not saying that that's not possible. My path and what I teach is I want to be able to go in at will. I don't want it to be a random experience that just happens, you know, once in a while where I can't set it up. I want to develop the skills. I want to develop the consciousness. I want to live a lifestyle whereby pretty much every time I sit to meditate, I can enter into that space. And as a priest, really, you have to, because people come to a priest for counseling. You can't just give them your opinion. That's not fair, because my opinion is going to be colored by how I've lived. So I have to be able to go into this place, this presence of consciousness, and go, what do I do here? What is the best guidance that I have for this individual? Because you are acting as a vehicle of love. So the love moves through you and out, and it cleanses your being. And that gives you fuel to go back into your meditation and go, okay, I'm going to look at this aspect of myself that's been troubling me for umpteen months. So we can't forever obsess about our process before we're ready to do something. We will be much more liberated if we integrate the two. We reflect, we change our causes to elicit the effects we want, and we're out there being the effects for other people's prayers. We're out there helping people to whatever degree we can. Okay?